There's a reason these words reached you now. You didn't stumble here by chance. Something in you quiet, ancient, alert has already begun to awaken. It's the same current you've been feeling for weeks, maybe months, that strange pressure in the air, that sense that something vast is stirring just beyond the edge of articulation. This isn't fantasy pretending to be intuition. It's the unmistakable signature of convergence, the subtle hum that precedes transformation. And the very fact that you're here means your comeback frequency has already switched on. Most people never realize it when it happens. They remain suspended in the space between wishing and becoming, between imagining change and embodying it. They dream about evolution, talk about breakthroughs, but never cultivate the capacity to receive what they've been asking for. They pray for rebirth, yet resist the contractions that make rebirth possible. But you've been moving differently. Something has been constructing itself beneath the surface of your awareness. Every time you chose persistence when surrender felt easier, every time you looked into your own eyes and refused to retreat, every time you felt that magnetic pull toward a version of yourself that refused to stay small, your nervous system was preparing for what's next. What no one tells you about quantum comeback is that it doesn't arrive with trumpets or countdowns. There's no flashing sign announcing that the shift has begun. It enters disguised as ordinary moments, carrying extraordinary resonance, tiny ruptures that reveal the fault lines between who you were and who you're becoming. You're standing there now between realities. The old structure of your life feels too narrow, yet the new one hasn't fully formed. It's an uneasy in-between part dissolution, part genesis where discomfort signals metamorphosis. Look back over the last stretch of your life. Haven't things started to feel different? Situations that once merely drained you now feel intolerable. Conversations that once comforted you leave you hollow. Even your own ambitions taste different, stripped of their former sweetness. This isn't collapse, it's clearance. Reality is carving space for what's ready to emerge. The comeback you've sensed won't unfold in cinematic perfection. It will be messy, intimate, alive, a slow reconfiguration of everything you thought you knew about yourself. What's expanding isn't your external power, it's your capacity to hold truth, to express fully, to remain whole even as you unravel. And yes, it feels like fragmentation before it reveals itself as integration. That's the threshold you're crossing now. That pressure you've been feeling, it didn't vanish when the threshold opened. It deepened, like tectonic plates grinding beneath the surface, unseen yet impossible to ignore. Each subtle tremor in your chest, each strange restlessness in your body, is the sound of your inner world rearranging itself for the reality about to take form. At first, it feels like something's wrong. You notice the tension in your shoulders, the racing pulse, the insomnia that seems to hum with invisible electricity. You tell yourself it's stress, fatigue, the byproduct of too much thinking. But what if it's none of those things? What if what you're calling anxiety is the nervous system learning to hold a higher voltage? Imagine your consciousness as a complex ecosystem: nerves, memories, emotions, all orbiting a central field of coherence. When a new frequency enters, the old patterns scramble for position. The body interprets that as discomfort, even danger, because the unknown has arrived. But beneath the tremor lies precision. The organism is recalibrating. Think of it like this: when continents shift, mountains rise, but to the land itself it feels like breaking. That's what's happening inside you. The deep plates of your identity are colliding, fusing, reorienting into something stronger, more aligned. The friction isn't punishment, it's propulsion. You might notice moments when your perception flickers, when time feels fluid or your emotions swing between extremes. These are resonant shocks, tiny flashes of coherence that your old nervous system can barely contain. They pass through like lightning, momentary and bright, then fade, leaving traces of something vast. That vastness is you expanding. And yet, expansion always demands surrender. The harder you fight the pressure, the more it amplifies. Resistance traps energy in the body. Allowance lets it flow. When you stop labeling your sensations as bad and start treating them as data, your whole physiology shifts. Muscles unclench, breath deepens. The current finds its rhythm. The truth is, transformation begins in the most biological places in the fibers, the pulse, the chemical messengers of the body that whisper, "We are becoming different." Before the mind understands what's happening, the flesh already knows. You may feel detached from old ambitions, confused by desires that no longer fit. This isn't apathy, it's clearing bandwidth for a new signal. The things that once defined you are loosening their grip because they cannot exist at the new frequency you're tuning to. So when the inner quake comes, don't rush to still it. Let it roll through you like thunder, finding its own sky. Trust that your system knows how to reorganize itself. The pressure isn't proof that you're failing. It's evidence that you're resonating. And soon, the rhythm beneath the tremor will start to sound like music. And that music, faint at first, becomes the bridge between who you were and who you're becoming. It hums through your bones like a code you half remember, both haunting and liberating. You're standing in the space between selves. It's a liminal territory where identity softens and the scaffolding of your old personality begins to dissolve. This dissolution can feel like disorientation. You question your motives, your desires, even your sense of belonging. The maps that once guided you are now blank pages waiting for new ink. But here's the hidden grace. What feels like loss is actually the nervous system releasing outdated information. The stories that once defined you are no longer coherent with the field you're entering. They collapse, not because you failed them, but because they've completed their function. Think of a caterpillar's transformation, how the old form melts into formlessness before the wings appear. There is no halfway form, no neat transition. There's only surrender to the biochemical chaos that allows new architecture to rise. You, too, are inside that chrysalis. The pressure from the previous section was the heat of metamorphosis. Now, the form itself begins to rewrite. During this stage, you might feel strangely invisible. The world moves around you, but you're not fully in it. Conversations skim the surface. Familiar spaces feel foreign. The echo of your former self lingers, but her language no longer fits your mouth. This is not depression, it's latency. Your consciousness is buffering, downloading the structure of a new self that has never existed before. And yes, it's lonely. Every genuine emergence is, but solitude isn't emptiness, it's gestation. The silence around you is full of codes, rearranging, calibrating, preparing. You may notice flashes of déjà vu, as though the future is leaking into the present. You catch glimpses of yourself acting from a place you haven't yet reached. These are not fantasies, they're resonance previews, quantum echoes of the reality aligning ahead. What's crucial now is gentleness. Your nervous system is your temple. Feed it stillness, feed it patience. The in-between demands softer edges, slower rhythms, less proving, more allowing. Identity isn't a thing you possess, it's a frequency you inhabit. When you try to rush redefinition, you distort the signal. When you relax, you allow coherence to find you. This is the paradox of becoming. You don't assemble the new self like a sculpture. You unlearn until the essential pattern reveals itself. Every tear you've shed recently, every restless night, every flicker of doubt, they are solvents dissolving what no longer matches the field of your next expression. And when the dissolution completes, something astonishing happens. you begin to sense the quiet hum of alignment beneath the chaos, the first signs of structural coherence forming beneath your skin. The in-between is not a void, it's the womb of reality itself. Stay there. Let the formlessness finish its work, because the self that's emerging will not need the old scaffolding to stand. From that formless space, something else begins to happen. Reality starts pushing back not in cruelty, but in calibration. The old world feels like sandpaper against your new frequency, and everything that once felt comfortable begins to resist you. That resistance is intelligence. It's the universe, testing structural integrity before the next phase of emergence. You see, when an old pattern collapses, it doesn't disappear quietly. It shakes the room on its way out. You notice it first in the small frictions, conversations that suddenly sting, rooms that feel heavier than before, plans that fall apart at the very last minute. Each disruption is an echo of a former identity trying to reassert itself. But pay attention, what's dissolving isn't your life. It's the architecture that held you in a smaller orbit. This is what clearance feels like. It's not chaos, it's renovation. The walls of your reality are being stripped bare so new wiring can run through. Imagine standing in a house while it's being remodeled. Dust everywhere, wires exposed, lights flickering. It's not unlivable, it's just in transition. That's your consciousness right now. The old system is offline, the new one is still initializing. And though it feels uncomfortable, even destabilizing, this phase is vital, because everything that can't hold your next frequency must surface for release. Relationships built on compromise instead of truth. Ambitions born from proving rather than purpose. Habits that once numbed pain but now numb possibility. All of them step forward for review. It's tempting to interpret the collapse as failure, but failure is just the nervous system's translation for unknown. What's really happening is synchronization, the external world updating to match your internal upgrade. You may notice people reacting strangely to your energy. Some will distance themselves. Others will project their unhealed stories onto you. Let them. You're no longer compatible with certain vibrations, and that dissonance can feel like rejection, but it's actually resonance doing its sacred sorting. This is when you must remember letting go is not loss. It's release velocity. The faster you unclench what's complete, the smoother the emergence becomes. If you resist the process, the field amplifies it. If you surrender, the field stabilizes it. The moments that seem like breakdowns, financial stalls, creative droughts, emotional surges are just pressure points releasing outdated charge. Your nervous system is detoxing timelines that no longer belong to the signal you're sending. Yes, it can look like everything's falling apart, but the truth, it's falling inward toward coherence. So when an old friendship dissolves or a career path suddenly shuts down, ask yourself, what frequency was this built on? If the answer is fear, appeasement, or survival, then its exit is grace disguised as loss. Every earthquake of change clears debris that once muffled your resonance, and soon what remains will be clean ground, raw, open, fertile. The new structure begins to assemble itself quietly, from alignment rather than attachment. You'll feel the first signs of that rebuilding not in your mind, but in your breath. There's a steadiness that wasn't there before, a strange calm at the center of the storm. That's coherence beginning to anchor. What used to feel like endings are actually proof that reality is obeying new instructions. The system is clearing space for the architecture of your comeback. And that, friend, is sacred demolition, the moment when destruction and creation become the same act. And from the dust of that sacred demolition, something powerful begins to form boundaries. Not walls made of fear, but frequency gates made of truth. You start noticing where your energy flows freely, and where it bleeds out like water through a cracked vessel. Every yes and every no becomes a form of energetic engineering. This is the era of choosing without guilt. You may have been taught that boundaries are barriers, that saying no makes you cold or selfish. But boundaries are not about exclusion, they're about coherence. They define the edges of your signal, the perimeter where your frequency holds shape. When the nervous system is recalibrating to a higher resonance, it becomes hypersensitive. The smallest dissonance feels amplified. That's why old obligations suddenly feel unbearable. That's why conversations that once entertained you now leave a residue. You're no longer able to distort your energy to fit misaligned frequencies. This is not arrogance, it's alignment. Imagine your life as a symphony. Every instrument represents a relationship, an activity, a focus of attention. In the old composition, you tried to keep everyone playing in harmony by overextending yourself, adjusting constantly, muting your own notes. But the new frequency doesn't allow overcompensation. It demands precision. You are tuning your instrument to its natural resonance, and anything off-key must adjust or fade. So when you begin to decline invitations that once felt obligatory, when you step out of conversations that spiral into noise, when you stop explaining your boundaries to those who refuse to listen, understand that's you selecting your timeline. Boundaries are how the field learns who you are. Every clear no refines the coherence of your yes. Every time you withdraw energy from distortion, you amplify it within truth. But here's where the paradox deepens. As your boundaries strengthen, parts of you that were once conditioned to earn love through sacrifice will panic. They'll whisper that you're abandoning others, that you'll lose connection, that you'll be seen as unkind. That's not intuition, that's programming. It's the nervous system mourning an old survival strategy. Let it grieve, but don't obey it. Because genuine connection can only form between coherent fields. You cannot sustain relationships that require your fragmentation. When you hold boundaries with softness, not as shields, but as signals, you invite only those aligned with your new frequency to harmonize. You begin to attract conversations that energize rather than drain, opportunities that flow rather than force. You feel a subtle click in your reality, as if invisible gears are finally locking into place. Notice this: your boundaries aren't closing your world. They're focusing it. The energy you once scattered managing perceptions, defending decisions, apologizing for being yourself, that energy is returning home. It's fuel for creation. It's momentum for sovereignty. Boundaries are frequency literacy in action. They are your declaration to the field. I will no longer distort myself to remain relatable. And once you anchor that declaration not in rebellion, but in resonance, you become unshakable. Your choices stop apologizing for existing. Your presence stops negotiating for permission. And the signal you broadcast grows clearer than ever before. This is the quiet courage of coherence, saying no with love, yes with power, and allowing silence to do what words cannot. Because the clearer your signal becomes, the faster your timeline accelerates. Boundaries are not endings, they're portals. Every time you honor one, you step deeper into the comeback frequency, and once those portals open, you begin to feel something stirring beneath the quiet and unfamiliar steadiness. A pulse that doesn't depend on circumstance. It's your sovereignty returning. Not the loud, defiant kind that needs to prove its power, the subtle, grounded kind that simply is. This is the phase where the scattered fragments of your attention start finding their way home, where the energy once spent explaining, defending, or seeking approval begins to pool inward again, forming a current strong enough to power creation itself. Reclaiming scattered power isn't a single act. It's 1,000 small recognitions. It's noticing where you've outsourced your worth to other people's validation. It's realizing how often you've surrendered your peace to narratives that were never yours to begin with. Each awareness becomes an act of retrieval, a silent "I remember who I am." Think of your attention as currency in the quantum economy. Wherever you invest it, reality compounds. For years, you've been depositing energy into fear accounts, scarcity loops, and the expectations of others. But now that current is reversing. You're calling back what was yours all along. At first, it feels disorienting. You're used to measuring your strength by how much you can endure, not how deeply you can center. But the comeback timeline isn't about endurance, it's about presence. It's not about control, it's about coherence. Imagine a river that's been divided into dozens of small channels, trickling in every direction. It's lost momentum, lost depth. But when the barriers dissolve, those streams rush back together, and the river becomes forceful again. That's your consciousness right now converging, condensing, reclaiming velocity. Every no you spoke in the previous phase was not a withdrawal, it was redirection. Each moment you refused to shrink or explain was a signal sent to the field. My energy is sacred, and the field listened. Now it's responding with synchronicities, intuitive nudges, and opportunities that mirror your new coherence. But sovereignty also brings responsibility. The power you reclaim will test your integrity, because when energy consolidates, it amplifies everything, clarity and shadow alike. You'll see the hidden motives behind certain choices, the subtle manipulations disguised as kindness, the small ways you still betray your truth to keep peace. Don't judge these discoveries. They're diagnostic, not damning. Awareness without shame is transmutation. When you can witness an old pattern without collapsing into guilt, you're already rewriting the code. Here's the secret most people miss. Sovereignty isn't about separation, it's about clean connection. When you no longer drain yourself to maintain false bonds, authentic resonance can finally find you. The people, projects, and paths that enter your field now won't require performance. They'll require presence. And presence, sustained over time, becomes influence. Not the hierarchical kind, but the magnetic kind. The quiet danger of someone who knows their value without needing to defend it. This is the birth of creative authority. The moment you stop asking permission to exist, life begins to orbit around your signal rather than your struggle. You reclaim your power one choice at a time. Each moment you speak truth over convenience. Each breath you take without apology. Each decision made from peace instead of pressure. This is the geometry of sovereignty, a pattern of coherence that no external force can distort. And when that pattern stabilizes, the quantum field responds in kind, because reality recognizes a steady broadcaster. And that steadiness, the quiet hum of self-authority, draws you toward the deeper question: what exactly is happening beneath all this? Why does alignment rearrange reality so completely? It's here that the physics of your comeback reveals itself. Not physics in equations and chalk, but physics as poetry field mechanics, spoken through emotion and choice. The comeback frequency operates on coherence, not desire. Desire sends a fragmented signal. I want this, but I doubt it. Coherence sends a unified one. I am this, therefore it unfolds. In the quantum field, everything is vibration information encoded as possibility. Every thought, feeling, and act transmits data to that field. The stronger and clearer the signal, the faster the field organizes around it. That organization is what you call synchronicity. Think of coherence as internal agreement. When mind, heart, and action are all saying the same thing, the field receives a singular instruction. But when your words say yes, your feelings say maybe, and your body says no, the field receives static. Static produces delays, detours, mixed results. It isn't personal, it's physics. You've witnessed this before, the days you acted from calm certainty. Reality responded instantly, the message arrived, the opportunity appeared, the right person called, and the days you forced things from anxiety. Everything tangled. The external world simply mirrored your internal broadcast. So the art of comeback is not forcing reality to obey you. It's tuning yourself until reality can recognize you. Alignment is translation. You become fluent in the language the universe already speaks. Coherence doesn't mean perfection. It means honesty. It means allowing every part of you, fear, doubt, hope, joy, to face the same direction. You don't suppress contradiction, you integrate it. You hold the paradox steady until the signal stabilizes. This is why struggle feels so exhausting. Struggle is incoherence, pretending to be effort. When your frequency splinters, you try to make up the difference through willpower. But the moment the signal aligns, effort becomes flow. Movement becomes momentum. Imagine standing in a storm, shouting instructions to the wind. That's control. Now imagine becoming the still point around which the wind reorganizes itself. That's coherence. You've experienced glimpses of this state, the effortless decisions that seem to make themselves, the spontaneous encounters that feel pre-written. In those moments, you weren't manifesting, you were matching. You were vibrating in resonance with a timeline already waiting for your arrival. And here's the revolutionary part. Coherence is contagious. When you embody it, environments synchronize. People around you begin regulating to your steadiness without realizing it. That's why peace feels magnetic. It's a broadcast. But maintaining coherence requires radical self-honesty. You can't fake it. The field doesn't listen to words. It listens to frequency. Pretending to be aligned while harboring resentment is like sending a radio signal on 2 channels at once. All the universe hears is noise. So this is the discipline now to clear your broadcast, to speak, act, and choose from the same frequency of truth, to let go of goals that require you to abandon your peace in pursuit of them, because peace itself is the amplifier. When you cultivate coherence, life stops being something you chase and becomes something that converges around you. The comeback timeline isn't the reward for control. It's the reflection of surrender performed with precision. And when the signal finally stabilizes, you realize the field was never separate from you. It was waiting for you to speak its language, the language of alignment. And once you begin speaking that language fluently, a new kind of work begins, not outward, but inward. Integration. Because coherence cannot stabilize on top of fragmentation. It has to live inside wholeness. This is the unseen labor of the comeback, the updating of your inner operating system. Every belief, every reflex, every emotional loop, each one is a line of code written in moments when you were just trying to survive. And now, those old instructions are running on a hardware that's evolving faster than they can comprehend. The first sign of this integration process is fatigue. Not the kind sleep can fix, but the kind that comes when your nervous system is digesting lifetimes of information. You may find yourself revisiting memories, feeling emotions with no clear source. That's not regression, it's reconciliation. Your system is re-indexing itself, deciding what to keep and what to archive. Think of the psyche as a library after an earthquake. The books are scattered, but they're still yours. Integration is the act of gently picking them up, rereading what still feels true, and releasing the volumes that no longer serve the story you're writing now. Many avoid this phase because it lacks glamour. It doesn't sparkle like vision boards or breakthrough moments. It's quiet, slow, and profoundly human. Yet this is where the quantum work becomes somatic, where light meets tissue, where energy learns to stay grounded. Inside this process, you'll meet parts of yourself that have been exiled: the protector who interrupts intimacy, the achiever who equates stillness with failure, the inner child who hides when love approaches. These aspects aren't enemies, they're time travelers carrying old safety codes. You don't destroy them, you update them. When you meet an old pattern, pause. Don't analyze it, include it. Let your breath tell that part, it's safe now. Integration is not about self-improvement, it's about internal reunion. This reunion creates neurological coherence. Your brain stops sending mixed signals of fear and desire. It learns that authenticity isn't dangerous. And as those electrical patterns change, your reality field recalibrates automatically. You begin noticing small miracles. You react slower, speak clearer, recover faster. Emotions move through you like weather rather than storms. People who used to trigger collapse now trigger curiosity. You start responding from presence instead of protection, and as the old operating system deactivates, space opens for an entirely new instruction, set one rooted in truth, compassion, and capacity. Integration is alchemy disguised as maintenance. Every time you breathe through discomfort instead of numbing it, you're transmuting energy. Every time you forgive an old self instead of disowning them, you're closing an energetic leak. And slowly, what was fragmented begins to function as one organism again. The voice that once narrated your doubt grows quieter. The static between your thoughts and intuition dissolves. You start hearing your own signal clearly, without interference. When that happens, you realize coherence isn't something you achieve, it's what remains when nothing inside you is at war. It's the peace that hums beneath complexity, the resonance of all your parts finally choosing the same frequency. And from that wholeness, the field recognizes you again not as someone requesting change, but as change embodied. You become the calibration point for your entire reality. And from that calibration point, something extraordinary begins to unfold, a widening ripple, subtle but undeniable. The moment you stabilize coherence within yourself, you stop being a single node in isolation. You become a transmitter in a vast, living network of awakening. The field around you feels it first. People who never spoke of depth begin confessing their hidden longings. Strangers glance at you as if they know you. Loved ones either rise to meet your frequency or gently drift away. No longer sustained by the gravity that once bound you together, you are not causing these shifts through will. You are catalyzing them through resonance. Every nervous system is a tuning fork. When one finds coherence, it vibrates a reference tone into the collective field. Those who are ready begin to align not because you preach, but because you exist in equilibrium. Your presence becomes permission. This is how transformation propagates through humanity, not by conversion, but by coherence. Think of the Earth's magnetic grid, a web of invisible currents responding to every human emotion, every choice, every act of courage or fear. When you anchor coherence, you subtly rewrite that grid. The frequency of peace has measurable weight. It's tempting to romanticize this, to imagine yourself as some ascended being radiating light across galaxies. But remember, the mechanics are grounded and humble. Your greatest contribution to collective awakening is nervous system regulation, emotional honesty, and consistent embodiment of your truth. That's what upgrades the field. When you forgive, the signal of forgiveness strengthens in the collective waveform. When you stay grounded through chaos, you make calm a shared resource. Every micro-choice becomes macro-influence. This is how collective evolution happens in plain sight, through thousands of individuals quietly stabilizing their frequency while washing dishes, raising children, navigating heartbreak, creating art. There's no stage, no fanfare, just resonance multiplying invisibly. And yet, this expansion carries responsibility, because when your frequency rises, your sensitivity amplifies. You start to feel the undercurrents in conversations, the tension in rooms, the collective anxiety humming through headlines. It's easy to mistake empathy for obligation, to collapse back into overextension. But coherence doesn't mean absorbing chaos. It means transmuting it without losing form. So you learn to breathe differently in the presence of turbulence. You let energy move through you, not into you. You become a conduit, not a container. And as you hold that posture open but sovereign, the field around you begins reorganizing effortlessly. Projects align without pushing. Encounters synchronize with uncanny precision. You experience chance meetings that feel like choreography. This isn't magic in the mystical sense, it's harmonics. The more coherent your internal frequency, the less resistance the external field encounters in arranging itself. The universe loves a clear signal. You realize that you don't need to fix the world. You simply need to remain undistorted in it. The rest happens naturally. This is the heart of collective awakening, one integrated nervous system at a time, remembering the rhythm of coherence. Your comeback timeline was never just personal, it was a relay signal passed through generations. Your healing is ancestral repair. Your clarity is future architecture. And as this awareness settles, you begin to sense the next invitation forming at the horizon. If identity is not fixed, if selfhood is simply a pattern of chosen frequencies, then who else could you become? Now that the field itself recognizes you as fluent, that question, the one hovering at the edge of your awareness, pulls you into the final revelation. Identity itself was never solid, it was sound, a rhythm of consciousness repeating itself until you mistook it for me. But as coherence stabilizes, you begin to see identity for what it is, an instrument, not a cage. Every belief, every preference, every role you've ever played, each was a note in a larger symphony of becoming. And now, the music is modulating. You start to sense your future self not as a distant destination, but as a signal already broadcasting. That version of you, the one fully expressed, fully aligned, isn't waiting for time to catch up. They're right here, resonating just outside your current bandwidth, whispering in impulses, nudges, intuitive flashes. And when you listen closely enough, you realize this entire process has been about merging frequencies until the two of you present and potential become indistinguishable. You may feel déjà vu more frequently now. Moments repeat with strange familiarity, because your consciousness is collapsing timelines, pulling data from realities you've already lived in potential form. Every time you choose authenticity over approval, you lock in closer coherence with that higher frequency version. Every boundary, every breath of trust, every act of integrity is a handshake across timelines. Linear time starts to blur. The future stops feeling like someday and begins feeling like now, unfolding. And this realization changes everything about how you move. You stop striving for outcomes. You start embodying states. You stop asking, when will it happen, and begin living as though it already has. This isn't delusion, it's quantum literacy. The field doesn't respond to waiting, it responds to being. When you become the frequency of what you desire, reality has no choice but to synchronize. It's not that you're creating from scratch, you're selecting from infinity. All potential selves exist in the same cosmic library. Each thought, each choice is a cursor moving across probability. The one you highlight with sustained attention becomes your lived story. Your comeback timeline isn't a ladder upward, it's a convergence inward, a returning to the self that never forgot. That self has always been broadcasting, waiting for you to tune the dial precisely enough to hear the song again. And when you finally do, something miraculous yet simple occurs. You stop chasing alignment and start radiating it. You stop seeking purpose and start expressing it. You stop asking the universe for signs and start realizing you are the sign evidence that consciousness can remember itself through flesh, through breath, through choice. This is identity as coherence fluid, creative, untethered from performance. You wake up each morning not as a fixed persona, but as a frequency artist sculpting experience in real time. And from this perspective, the idea of comeback transforms again. You see, it was never about returning to an old power, it was about remembering that you were power all along. The future version of you isn't calling from ahead on the timeline. They're speaking through you now, smiling through your voice, steady in your heartbeat, present in your pause. You are the convergence. You are the merge point of every possible self collapsing into coherence. And as this realization anchors, everything quiets. No grand fireworks, no cosmic applause, just a stillness that feels infinite. Because when you finally become the frequency, there's nothing left to chase, only to embody. And so, from that stillness, a softer rhythm begins. The field is quiet now, not silent, but listening. What was once pressure has become pulse. You stand where all timelines meet, no longer searching for signs, no longer asking for proof. There's only the breath, steady and full, echoing through a body that finally feels like home. The comeback isn't a climax. It's a continuity, a gentle awareness that you never really left yourself. You simply wandered far enough to recognize the path back. If you look closely, you'll see how each fracture became a filament of light, how every collapse opened space for new architecture, how every loss was secretly a recalibration toward truth. This is the quiet power of completion, not the end of striving, but the beginning of sovereignty. You move differently now, slower but surer, no longer pulled by urgency. You sense when to act and when to wait. You recognize that patience is not passive, it's precision. The world still spins with its noise and haste, but your nervous system no longer confuses momentum with meaning. You trust timing the way the tide trusts the moon. You allow, you align, and in that allowance, life begins speaking to you in the language of ease. Small things, a conversation that lands with resonance, a door opening exactly when you needed it, a silence that feels like affirmation become proof of a new order. This is the legacy of the comeback timeline, not fame or perfection, but coherence lived daily. You've remembered that creation isn't a task, it's a state of being. That purpose isn't a goal, it's a frequency. You start to realize your life itself is a transmission. Every glance, every word, every breath sends data into the field, reminding others what's possible. You don't have to preach, presence does the work. And when doubt arises, as it will, you no longer panic. You breathe, you remind your body, we are safe even here. The comeback isn't about never falling, it's about knowing how to return to center, no matter how the wind shifts. So, as this journey settles into your bones, let one truth linger. You were never behind. You were synchronizing. Every delay, every detour, every ache was timing itself perfectly to meet this moment of coherence. And now that you're here in the still pulse of awareness, you can finally exhale. Let the frequency hum quietly in your chest. Let life respond. Let it build itself around your steadiness. Because this isn't an ending. It's the sound of arrival, and the field is still listening.